You know, some nights you look back on and you can't quite figure out where things went off the rails. For me, that night started like 100 others, with a rusty fence, a pair of bolt cutters, and a bad idea. I've always been drawn to forgotten places. Old hospitals, abandoned theme parks, you name it. There's a quiet story in the decay, in the way nature takes everything back. My YouTube channel wasn't big, barely 1,000 subscribers, but the few people who watched seemed to enjoy my little adventures into these lost corners of the world. My plan for that night was the old Blackwood Ridge Observatory. It had been shut down for decades, ever since the city built its new, fancy one on the other side of the state. It was miles from anywhere, perched on a lonely hill that was a pain to get to. Perfect. The air was cold and bit at my cheeks as I hiked the last half-mile up the overgrown access road. The moon was a thin sliver, and the stars were out in full force. It was one of those nights where the sky looks so deep you feel like you could fall right into it. I remember thinking how ironic it was to be at a place built for stargazing on a night like this. I found the weak spot in the fence I'd scouted out a week earlier. The chain was old and gave way with a satisfying crunch. I slipped through, my camera bag slung over my shoulder and my heavy maglite in my hand. The main building was a silhouette against the stars, a big, dark dome with a few smaller structures around it. It looked like a sleeping giant. I started filming as soon as I was on the grounds, whispering to my camera like I always did. I told my viewers where we were, a little bit of the history I'd looked up. It was built in the 1940s, a relic of a different time. I walked through the overgrown courtyard, my boots crunching on gravel and dead leaves. The place had that classic abandoned smell, a mix of damp earth, rust, and slow decay. I loved it. I tried a few of the doors on the outbuildings. All locked up tight just as I expected. My real target was the main observatory, the big dome. That's where the prize was, the massive old telescope left to rot. The main entrance was a set of heavy wooden doors, chained and padlocked. No getting through there. I did a lap around the building, running my flashlight beam over the brickwork. Weeds grew out of cracks in the foundation. Most of the windows were boarded up, but I found one on the ground floor where the plywood had rotted through in a corner. It wasn't big, but it was big enough. I had to ditch my bag and slide through on my stomach, ending up in a dusty pile on the other side. I was in. The air inside was even colder and dead still. My flashlight cut a sharp cone through the darkness, illuminating floating dust motes that looked like tiny galaxies. I was in what looked like an old library or study. Bookshelves lined the walls, but they were all empty. Papers were scattered across the floor, curled and yellowed from years of damp. I whispered to my camera again, describing the scene. I felt that familiar thrill, that mix of excitement and nerves. You're somewhere you're not supposed to be, seeing something nobody has seen in years. It's a rush. I picked up my bag, brushed myself off, and started to explore. I moved through a few rooms, an old office with a metal desk overturned, a small kitchenette where a calendar from 1981 was still pinned to the wall. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and grime. It was perfectly preserved in its own ruin. I was heading for the spiral staircase I knew would lead up to the dome. That was the money shot. But then I heard it. A sound. It was low, a deep hum that wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling. It vibrated through the soles of my boots, up my legs, and into my chest. My first thought was machinery. Maybe a generator was still active somewhere deep in the building, a backup system that had somehow kept running for 40 years. But that didn't make any sense. The power was cut decades ago, and the sound didn't feel mechanical. It was smooth, organic, almost like a massive cat purring. I stopped, switched off my camera's little red light, and just listened. The humming was constant, a single, unwavering tone. It seemed to be coming from upstairs, from the dome. My heart started pounding. This wasn't part of the plan. An abandoned building is one thing. An abandoned building with a weird, unexplainable noise is something else entirely. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around, to squeeze back out that rotten window and run. But my curiosity, that stupid, nagging voice that always gets me into trouble, wouldn't let me. I had to know what it was. I thought maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe another explorer was here, or worse, someone squatting. But the hum didn't sound like anything a person could make. I started moving again, but slower this time, quieter. I held my maglite like a club, my knuckles white. The spiral staircase was just ahead, a dark skeleton of cast iron. The humming grew stronger as I got closer. It was definitely coming from the top. I put one foot on the first step and it groaned in protest. I froze, listening. The humming didn't change. I took another step and then another, my heart hammering against my ribs. The whole way up, I was trying to rationalize it. It's the wind, I told myself. It's the wind moving through a vent or something in the dome, creating a weird resonance. It had to be. When I reached the top of the stairs, I was on a small landing in front of a heavy steel door. This was the entrance to the main observation deck, where the telescope was. The hum was so loud here it made my teeth buzz, and I noticed something else. A faint light was leaking from under the door, a soft, bluish glow that pulsed in time with the hum. Now I was really scared. Light meant power. Light and sound meant something was active up there. My brain was officially out of logical explanations. I reached out a shaky hand and touched the door. It was cold and it was vibrating. I expected it to be locked, but when I pushed, it slowly, silently swung inward. That wasn't right. A door like that should have screamed with rust. It moved like it was brand new. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring into the darkness beyond the doorway. The humming and the pulsing blue light beckoned from within. This was it, the point of no return. Looking back now, I wish I had listened to that fear. I wish I had turned and left, but I didn't. I took a deep breath, raised my flashlight, and stepped into the dome. And what I saw in there, it wasn't a telescope. It wasn't machinery. It was something that had no business being on top of a lonely hill in the middle of nowhere. It was something that had no business being anywhere on Earth. The beam from my flashlight cut through the dark and landed on it, and my world just stopped. In the center of the vast, circular room, where the giant telescope should have been, was something else. It was a pod. A huge, organic-looking thing, like a massive black seed that had fallen from an impossible tree. It was at least 15 feet tall, smooth and featureless, made of a material that seemed to drink the light from my flashlight. It wasn't metal and it wasn't stone. It was something else entirely. And all over its dark surface, thin lines pulsed with that soft, rhythmic blue light, in perfect time with the deep hum that was vibrating through the floor. The great telescope, the reason I'd come all this way, was there, but it had been pushed aside, shoved against the far wall like a piece of old furniture. A perfect circle of floor around the pod was completely clean, free of the decades of dust that covered everything else. My brain tried to make sense of it. For a split second, I thought it was some kind of modern art installation. Maybe a rich eccentric had bought the observatory and put this thing here. But that made no sense. Why hide it? Why no security? Then I thought military. A secret drone, a new kind of stealth vehicle. But it was completely silent apart from the hum. No engines, no moving parts. My mind was just cycling through one bad explanation after another, because the truth was too insane to even consider. I didn't move. I could barely breathe. All I could do was stare, my flashlight shaking so bad the beam was dancing all over the pod. I'd forgotten all about my camera, all about my channel. My whole world had shrunk to this dark room and the impossible thing at its center. And then it changed. The humming got deeper, the blue lights pulsed faster. A vertical seam I hadn't seen before appeared on the pod's surface, glowing brighter than the others. It widened, splitting the pod open with a sound like tearing fabric, but deep and resonant. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was the sound of something living. I stumbled back, my heel catching on something, and I fell hard on the dusty floor. My flashlight flew out of my hand and rolled away, its beam spinning wildly across the ceiling before settling on a far wall, leaving the center of the room in near darkness, lit only by the eerie blue glow from the opening pod. My heart was a jackhammer in my chest. I scrambled backward on my hands and feet trying to get away, my eyes locked on the widening slit of blue light. This is it, I thought. This is how it ends, eaten by some monster in an abandoned observatory. No one will ever know. A figure began to emerge from the light. It was tall, impossibly tall and slender. It unfolded itself from the pod, its limbs long and graceful. It moved with a slowness that was both terrifying and beautiful. It stepped out onto the clean floor, and the pod behind it sealed itself shut, the blue light returning to its slow, steady pulse. The being stood there, maybe 9 feet tall. Its body was a delicate frame of thin, dark limbs. I could make out joints that bent in ways a human's couldn't. Its skin, or whatever it was, had a faint iridescence that shifted from deep purple to dark green as it moved. There was no clothing, no equipment, just this elegant, fragile-looking creature. It turned its head toward me, and that's when I really felt the fear. It didn't have a face, not really. No mouth, no nose. Just a smooth, pale, ovoid shape. But set into that blankness were 2 eyes. They were large and black and perfectly round, like pools of liquid night. And when they looked at me, I felt it. I felt them seeing me, not just with light, but with something else. They were ancient. That was the only word I could think of. His eyes looked really old, like he'd seen a lot, more than anyone should. I was still on the floor, frozen. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. And then a voice spoke. But it wasn't a voice I heard with my ears. It was in my head, as clear as my own thoughts. It was calm and genderless, and it didn't sound human. It felt old. The voice said, "Do not be afraid." That's when I completely lost it. A voice in my head. I squeezed my eyes shut. I'm dreaming, I thought. I hit my head when I fell. This isn't real. I'm hallucinating from the dust. Maybe there's some kind of fungus in here. I opened my eyes again. He was still there, standing perfectly still, watching me. The voice came again, softer this time. You are not hurt. You are not dreaming. Please do not be afraid. My fear is loud. His fear is loud. What did that even mean? I pushed myself up into a sitting position, my back against a cold metal pillar. I asked him, "Who are you?" The words came out as a choked whisper in the real world, but in my head the question was a clear, terrified shout. He tilted his head slightly. The voice responded, "I am a traveler. My name would be difficult for you to pronounce, but you may call me Kale." I had to stop and process that. A traveler, Kale, an alien. A real-life alien was standing 20 feet away from me in an abandoned observatory, and he was talking to me inside my own skull. Part of me was still screaming that I was insane, that I was having a complete psychotic break. But the other part of me, the part that was staring at the 9-foot-tall being and the glowing pod, knew this was real. I asked him why he was here, in this building. "I am waiting," Kale told me. "This place was chosen long ago. It is quiet. It is forgotten. That is what I require." My fear was starting to give way to a flood of a million other emotions. Confusion, disbelief, and a powerful, overwhelming curiosity. The urban explorer in me was taking over from the terrified guy on the floor. I grabbed my flashlight, my hand shaking a little less now, and got to my feet. I pointed the beam at him and he didn't flinch. The light played over his iridescent skin. I needed to see him clearly. I needed to be sure. "Why are you talking to me?" I asked. "Why reveal yourself?" "Your arrival was not expected," he said, "but it is not a problem. My waiting is almost at an end. Your presence changes little, but your fear was disruptive. It was necessary to calm you." I took a hesitant step forward. I still couldn't quite believe it. I've seen all the movies, I've read the books. You never expect it to be real, and you never expect it to be like this. No flashing lights in the sky, no spaceships over major cities. Just a quiet, lonely being waiting in the dark. There's something I haven't told you yet, but it's the most important part of all of this. It's what he told me next that made me realize this wasn't just some random encounter. It was something else entirely. I asked him what he was waiting for. His gaze seemed to go right through me. He looked up toward the domed ceiling as if he could see the stars right through the metal and concrete. "I am waiting for a signal, a message from home. It is a long journey, and I needed a place to rest where I would not be disturbed. This world, your world, is a convenient waypoint." A waypoint, like a galactic truck stop. The casualness of it was staggering. I looked around the dusty, forgotten room. To me, it was a cool, creepy place to explore. To him, it was just a quiet spot to park his pod and wait for a call. It made me feel incredibly small. I had so many questions, my mind was buzzing with them. Where was he from? How did he get here? Was he alone? It was like being a kid again, the kind of wonder you feel when you look up at the stars. Only this time the stars had come down to talk to me. I took another step. "Why this observatory?" I asked him. "You said it was chosen long ago. By who?" "By others of my kind," he replied, the voice in my head patient and steady. "They have visited this planet many times over the course of your history. They do not interfere. They only observe. They leave markers at quiet places, places where the planet's natural energy is calm. This is one such place." My mind reeled. Others of his kind. They've been here before. This wasn't a first contact situation. It was more like I'd stumbled into a private room someone had been using for centuries. I thought about all the stories, all the ancient myths and legends of gods coming from the sky. Were they all real? Were they all just travelers like Kale stopping for a rest? He must have sensed my spiraling thoughts because he added, "Most of what you think you know about your past is incomplete. Your history is like a book with most of its pages torn out. You have only the fragments and you try to piece them together." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I didn't realize this moment would change everything. The question was simple, but the answer he was about to give me would shatter my understanding of the world. He turned those deep, black eyes back to me. "I can show you one of the missing pages," he said. "It concerns a story you know well, a story about a great flood and a large boat built to save the world." My blood ran cold. He was talking about Noah's Ark. I just stared at him, my mouth hanging open. What could an alien from another world possibly know about that? I thought this was about spaceships and distant planets. But he was about to tell me that the biggest secrets weren't in the stars. They were right here in our own past. And I had a terrible feeling I wasn't going to like what I was about to hear. He wasn't just a traveler. He was a keeper of secrets. And he was about to share one with me. The air in the dome suddenly felt heavy, thick with unspoken history. Noah's Ark, the story was so familiar, a cornerstone of Sunday school lessons and picture books. A man, a boat, two of every animal. It was a simple story, a story of faith. But the way Kale said it, the way those ancient eyes held mine, I knew his version would be anything but simple. My curiosity was now a raging fire, burning away the last remnants of my fear. I had to know. I gestured with my hand, a silent "go on." "The story you have is a memory," Kale's voice echoed in my mind. "A memory passed down through countless generations. Like all memories, it has faded. Details were lost and new ones were added to fill the gaps. The core of it, however, is true. There was a great flood, a global cataclysm." That wasn't a huge surprise. I'd heard theories about a real historical flood that inspired the myth. Geologists have found evidence of massive floods in ancient history, but I had a feeling that's where the similarities would end. I asked him who was Noah. "The man you call Noah was a real person," Kale explained. "But he was not a boat builder. He was a keeper, a caretaker. Your planet goes through cycles, great periods of change. Some are slow, like your ice ages. Others are very, very fast. Your world was approaching one of these rapid changes. A celestial alignment was going to cause a massive gravitational shift, leading to devastating geological instability. Earthquakes, volcanoes, and yes, a flood on a scale your people could not imagine. We saw it coming." My mind was struggling to keep up. We. He meant his people, the travelers. They knew it was going to happen. "We do not interfere," Kale repeated, his mental voice firm as if reciting a sacred rule. "That is our most important law. We observe. We learn. But we do not alter the natural course of a world's development. To do so would be to play God, and we are not gods. We are just older." "But if you didn't interfere, then how was anyone saved?" I asked. "What about the Ark?" "Interference is a complex concept," he replied. "To give a primitive society advanced technology would be interference. To stop the flood would be interference, but to preserve what is already there, that is a different matter. It is an act of conservation, of archiving. The vessel you call the Ark was not a boat made of wood and pitch. My heart pounded. I had a feeling I knew where this was going. It was one of ours, Cale confirmed. A biorepository, a seed bank. It was not designed to save your people. It was designed to save your planet's life, the genetic blueprints of every species. We couldn't stop the cataclysm, but we could ensure that life would have a chance to begin again after it passed. I sank down and sat on the cold floor, my legs suddenly weak. A spaceship. Noah's Ark was a spaceship. It wasn't built to float on water, it was built to leave, to ride out the disaster from orbit and then return. And Noah, I asked the keeper. He and his family were chosen, Cale explained, not for their righteousness, but for their affinity for the natural world. They were simple people who lived in harmony with the land. They understood the creatures you share this world with. We needed caretakers, people who could manage the biological samples within the vessel. They were not told the full truth. They were told only what they could understand, that they were being saved from a great flood and that they had to bring the animals with them. I tried to picture it. This family led into a colossal alien ship, thinking it was a divine rescue, being told to gather animals when in reality they were probably just overseeing the activation of countless stasis pods or genetic sequencers. The story must have seemed like a miracle to them, a direct intervention from their God. They did not collect two of every animal, Cale's voice clarified, answering my unspoken thought. That would have been impossible. They helped us collect genetic samples, DNA, tissue, embryos, everything needed to reseed a world. The vessel was vast, a self-sustaining ecosystem. It held the essence of your world's biosphere in its archives. So the story, the animals marching two by two, that was just, I trailed off. A simplification, Cale finished. A story told by people trying to explain something far beyond their comprehension. How would they describe a genetic laboratory to their descendants? How would they explain a cryostasis chamber? They used the words and concepts they knew. A big boat, pairs of animals. It was the only way the memory could survive. It made a twisted kind of sense. The original event was real, but the story that survived was like a child's drawing of a supercomputer. The details are all wrong, but you can kind of see what they were trying to capture. It was a story translated through a filter of Bronze Age understanding. Where did they go? I asked during the flood. They were taken from the planet, Cale stated simply. They remained in a low, stable orbit, watching the world below be reshaped by water. It must have been a terrifying and awe-inspiring sight for them. They were the sole witnesses to the world's destruction and rebirth. I thought about the sheer psychological weight of that. To watch everything you've ever known be washed away, knowing you're one of the only survivors, floating among the stars in a vessel you don't understand, guided by beings you can't comprehend. No wonder the story that came down through the ages was so epic, so filled with divine wrath and salvation. It was the only way to process that kind of trauma. There's one thing that still doesn't make sense, I said, looking up at him. You said your people don't interfere, But saving Noah, saving the animals, isn't that the biggest interference of all? It is a fine line, he admitted. We have a saying, you do not stop the fire, but you can preserve the library. The development of your sentient species, your consciousness, your societies, that is the fire. It must burn its own course. But the library, the vast, beautiful, intricate library of life that your world has created over billions of years, that is too precious to lose. We preserve the library so that when the fire dies down, there are still stories to be read. Noah and his family were the librarians. A librarian, not a prophet, not a chosen one in the religious sense. He was a man given a job, a janitor for the planet's genetic code. It was a demotion for Noah, but an incredible promotion for the story of humanity. It meant we weren't just some random experiment on a lonely planet. We were part of a larger galactic community, even if we were just the part they were observing from a distance. Our planet was a library worth saving. But why are you telling me this? I asked him. This is the biggest secret in human history. Why tell a random guy who broke into an old building? Because you asked, he said, his voice in my head seeming to hold a hint of something I couldn't place. Maybe amusement, and because it is time. Your species is approaching another crossroads. You are beginning to look to the stars yourselves. You are beginning to understand the building blocks of life. Soon you will find the pages we tore out of your history books. You will find traces of our technology, remnants of our visits. It is better that you have some context. It is better that the story comes as a revelation, not a shock. A revelation, not a shock. He had a funny way of putting it. My entire worldview had just been detonated and he called it context. But he was right. What would happen if archaeologists found the wreckage of an ancient, alien probe tomorrow? Or if geneticists found markers in our DNA that weren't from this planet? The world would panic. It would shatter religions, governments, everything. But a story can prepare you. And there was something else he said that stuck with me. He said he was telling me because I asked. Was it really that simple? Did I just stumble into the right place at the right time and ask the right question? It felt too convenient. My fear of him was completely gone now. It had been replaced by a profound sense of awe. I was talking to a being who had watched my species stumble out of the caves. His people had witnessed our entire history from the sidelines. They had a copy of our planet on a hard drive. I felt like a child sitting at the feet of a grandfather, listening to a story about a time before time. But this story wasn't a fairy tale. It was real, and it had implications that I was only just beginning to grasp. If they saved life on Earth once, would they do it again? Was that what he meant by another crossroads? I had to ask, is another flood coming? The cycles continue, Kale said, his non-face turning back toward the dome as if listening for something. The universe is a dynamic place. Change is the only constant, but the next crossroads for your people is not from the heavens. It is from within. You have created your own floods, your own fires. The question is whether you will learn to put them out yourselves. We will not interfere in that. That is a test you must pass on your own. His words sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't talking about a natural disaster. He was talking about us. Our wars, our pollution, our self-destructive tendencies. The library was in danger again, but this time the fire was coming from inside. And the librarians weren't going to get a spaceship to escape in. They were going to burn with the books. It was a sobering, terrifying thought. and it made me wonder what else he knew. What other missing pages did he hold? The story of the flood was just one. What about the pyramids? What about Stonehenge? What about the gods of Olympus or the stories in the Vedas? Were they all just faded memories of encounters with travelers like Kale? My mind was a storm of questions, and the night was far from over. I didn't know it then, but the revelation about the Ark was just the beginning. It was the appetizer. The main course was yet to come, and it was going to be even harder to swallow. The conversation was about to take a turn I never could have predicted, revealing his true purpose for being here, and it had very little to do with waiting for a phone call home. The weight of his words settled in the silence of the dome. Us. We were the problem now. The idea that these ancient, powerful beings were watching us, treating our entire civilization like a science experiment that might be about to go horribly wrong, was deeply unsettling. It was like finding out your whole life has been a reality TV show, and the producers are just waiting to see if you'll set the house on fire. I stood up, dusting off my pants. The dusty floor, the cold air, the imposing figure of Kale, it all felt strangely normal now. My brain had accepted the impossible and was now just trying to operate within this new, bizarre reality. "So you just watch?" I asked, the question sounding more accusatory than I intended. "You watch us make the same mistakes over and over and you do nothing." "Doing nothing is the hardest choice," Kale replied, his tone unchanged. "But it is the only correct one. Imagine a child learning to walk. You can hold its hands and guide it and it will never fall. But it will also never truly learn to walk on its own. It will always be dependent. To learn, the child must be allowed to fall, to stumble, to get bruised. It is the only way it develops the strength and balance to stand. Your species is that child. You are learning to walk on a cosmic scale. You must be allowed to stumble." His analogy was simple, but it hit hard. I thought about human history. The endless wars, the empires rising and falling, the moments of incredible brilliance and staggering cruelty. Were they all just stumbles, bruises on the knees of a toddler species? It was a humbling perspective. "But what if the child is about to walk off a cliff?" I pressed. "Do you just watch then, too?" "We do not know if it is a cliff," he responded. "We see probabilities, not certainties. Your future is not a single path. It is a branching river of infinite possibilities. Every choice you make, as a species and as individuals, closes some paths and opens others. We see the river, but we do not know which way the water will ultimately flow. To intervene would be to dam the river, forcing it down a single channel of our choosing, and we have no right to do that." I looked at the pod, humming softly in the center of the room. He called himself a traveler, a waypoint observer. But the more he spoke, the more he sounded like something else. A guardian, maybe. A silent, non-interventionist zookeeper for an entire planet. The thought made my skin crawl a little. "Why are you really here, Kale?" I asked, my voice steady. "You said you were waiting for a signal from home, but you're talking about probabilities, about our future. It doesn't sound like you're just passing through." For the first time, there was a pause, a hesitation in the flow of thoughts from him to me. It lasted only a second, but it was noticeable. The steady, calm stream of information faltered. "My purpose is twofold," he finally said. "Waiting is my primary task, but my secondary task is to update the archive." Update the archive. I repeated, the seed bank, the genetic library from the Ark. Yes, it is a continuous process. Life on your planet is in constant flux. Species evolve. New ones emerge. Others vanish. The archive must be a living document. My predecessors have done this for millennia. They arrive, they collect new data, they upload it to the main repository, and they leave. Quietly. Unseen. So you're a biologist then? A galactic census taker? That is a functional, if limited, description, he agreed. I looked at him, this impossibly tall, graceful being. I tried to picture him out in a forest gathering samples. It was a strange image. It also raised a new, more personal question. Have you been collecting my data? Am I in your archive now? He tilted his head again, that slow, curious gesture. Your genetic sequence was scanned the moment you entered this room. It is a passive process. Do not be alarmed. Your data is just one of many billions of entries, a single word in a very large library. Somehow that wasn't comforting. I was now officially a specimen, a word in a book I couldn't read. It was a profound violation of privacy that was so total, so absolute, that I couldn't even get angry about it. It was like being angry at the sky for being blue. It just was. But then a darker thought occurred to me, and this was the part that truly started to scare me again, more than the pod or the voice in my head. You said species vanish, I said slowly. Are we one of them? In your probabilities, is our extinction a strong possibility? Is that why you're here now? To get a final sample before we walk off the cliff? His silence was longer this time. The blue lights on the pod seemed to dim slightly. The hum deepened. I felt a wave of something from him, an emotion that I couldn't name. It wasn't pity. It was heavier than that. It was something ancient and weary, like the feeling of watching a star burn out. Your species possesses a unique duality, he finally said. You have a capacity for empathy and creativity that is breathtakingly beautiful. We have observed you create art, music, and philosophies that resonate across the cosmos. You are capable of selfless love and profound sacrifice. But you also possess a capacity for self-destruction that is equally potent. You are volatile, a brilliant, unstable element. We do not know which side of your nature will ultimately prevail. He wasn't answering my question, not directly. And that was an answer in itself. They didn't know. We were a coin toss, a cosmic maybe. That was a terrifying thought. The idea that our entire existence, everything we'd ever built or dreamed of, could just fizzle out because of the darker parts of our own nature. So this update you're doing, it's important, I stated. It's because we're at a tipping point. All updates are important, he said, but his lack of denial was deafening. But yes, this era of your development is of particular interest. You have unlocked the power of the atom. You have unraveled the code of life. You have connected your entire planet with an invisible web of information. You have given yourselves the tools of gods, but you still have the emotional maturity of a warring, tribal species. It is a dangerous combination. He was right. He was absolutely, terrifyingly right. We were like toddlers with loaded guns. And he was the adult in the room, quietly taking notes from a safe distance, ready to document the tragedy if it happened. The conversation had shifted from the ancient past to the immediate, terrifying future, and his role in it was becoming clearer and far more ominous. He wasn't just a zookeeper. He was a cosmic coroner, waiting to see if he needed to sign the death certificate for a whole planet. This new understanding changed the dynamic between us. He wasn't just a source of incredible secrets anymore. He was a judge, or maybe just a witness at the trial, and I felt this sudden, overwhelming urge to defend my species, to prove him wrong. "We can change," I said, the words feeling small and hollow in the vast dome. "We can be better." He turned his full attention back to me. Those black, endless eyes seemed to search for something deep inside my mind. "I believe you can," he said. "The potential is there. It is why we continue to observe. You are not a failed experiment. You are simply an unfinished one. There is still hope." But then he added something that chilled me to the bone. "But hope does not change the probabilities. It only illuminates the most desirable path. The choice to walk it is still yours." And that's when I realized the true weight of the Noah story. It wasn't a story about salvation. It was a story about a reset, a do-over. His people weren't here to save us from ourselves. They were just here to save the blueprints so the planet could try again with something else after we were gone. We weren't the children they were trying to teach. We were just the current occupants of the house. And if we burned it down, they'd just rebuild it and let new tenants move in. Maybe the meek really would inherit the earth, after we, the loud and destructive, had finally silenced ourselves. The encounter had started with a sense of wonder, of discovery. Now, it was turning into something much darker. A confrontation with the potential extinction of my entire species, told to me by a being who would watch it happen without lifting a finger. I felt a surge of anger, of defiance. "Who are you to decide that?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Who are you to stand there and talk about us like we're a lab rat in a maze? This is our planet, our home." My anger did not seem to affect him. His mental voice remained perfectly calm. "It is not a decision we make. It is an observation we record. We are the librarians, remember. We do not write the books. We only preserve them. The story of your species is being written by you and you alone, every single day." His calm, detached logic was infuriating. It was unassailable. How could I argue against it? He was making perfect, horrible sense. We were our own worst enemy, and he was just waiting to see who won the final battle. I paced around the room, the beam of my flashlight cutting frantic patterns in the dark. I needed to understand his endgame. Why he was here in this place at this time. I still didn't believe it was just for a routine update. The timing was too perfect. Our crisis as a species was too acute. There had to be more to it. I stopped and faced him again. "What's the signal you're waiting for?" I asked, my tone demanding. "The one from home. What is it?" He was silent for a moment. I could feel a sense of conflict coming from him. A reluctance. "It is a summons," he finally answered. "A recall." "A recall for what?" I pressed. "My tour of duty is over," he said. "My replacement is arriving. The one who will continue the observations. I am simply waiting for the confirmation that they have entered the system. Then I may go home." I stared at him, my mind working furiously. A replacement, a changing of the guard. It sounded so routine, so bureaucratic, but it didn't feel that way. Nothing about this felt routine. There was an urgency to it, a tension beneath his calm exterior. And I had a terrible, sinking feeling that his departure and the arrival of his replacement was tied directly to the crossroads he kept talking about, the tipping point for humanity. I didn't realize it yet, but I was about to find out that his replacement wasn't just another observer. They were coming for a very specific reason. And that reason would make the story of Noah's Ark seem like a gentle bedtime story. The greatest revelation wasn't about the past. It was about the immediate future. The idea of a replacement, a cosmic shift change, hung in the air. It sounded so mundane, like one security guard clocking out and another clocking in. But my gut was screaming that there was more to it. His talk about our volatility, about us being at a tipping point, it all felt connected to this. The timing was just too precise. Why change the guard now, at this critical moment in our history? Why now? I asked him, my voice low. Why is your replacement coming now? Is it because of us? Because you think we're about to break the experiment? Cale's silent gaze held mine for a long moment. I felt him probing my thoughts, not in an invasive way, but like a doctor gently examining a patient. He was gauging my reaction, my ability to comprehend what he was about to say. The revelations about our past were one thing. They were distant, historical. But this was about the future, my future, our future. The timing is not a coincidence, he finally admitted, his mental voice taking on a graver tone. The protocols of observation change when a species reaches a certain technological and social threshold, the one you are currently at. My replacement is not a simple observer like myself. Their function is different. Different how? I asked, my heart starting to pound again. A cold dread was beginning to seep into my bones. I am a chronicler, Cale explained. I record what has been. My task is to preserve the history, the culture, the biology of a world. I am, as you said, a librarian for the past. My replacement is a different kind of specialist. They are a proctor. Proctor, the word sounded academic, formal, but coming from him in this dark, humming room it sounded terrifying. A proctor is someone who supervises an exam, a test. A test for what? I whispered. What test? The test of ascension, he said, or self-annihilation. It is the final exam for any species that reaches your level of development. You have mastered your planet, but you have not mastered yourselves. You have the power to create a paradise or to burn your world to a cinder. The universe does not allow such unstable power to expand unchecked. Before a species is permitted to travel beyond its own star system, it must prove it is not a threat to itself or to others. The implications of his words crashed over me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just observation anymore. This was judgment. We were being tested, and a proctor was coming to grade us. I felt a surge of indignation. Permitted, I repeated, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. Who gives you the right? Who are you to permit or deny us anything? You say you don't interfere, but this sounds like the biggest interference of all. It is not a judgment we enjoy, he said, and for the first time I felt a clear, distinct emotion from him. Sadness. A deep, ancient sorrow. It is a necessity, a law of cosmic quarantine. We have seen it happen before. Young, brilliant species full of promise who take their conflicts and their fears out into the galaxy. They become plagues, cancers. They spread destruction not because they are evil, but because they never learn to control their own worst instincts. The quarantine is not a punishment. It is a tragic necessity to protect the countless other worlds, the other libraries of life that are still growing. I leaned against the cold brick of the observatory wall, the reality of what he was saying sinking in. It was horrifying, but it also made a terrible kind of sense. If humanity discovered faster-than-light travel tomorrow, what would we do with it? Would we explore in peace? Or would we export our wars, our greed, our tribalism to the stars? I knew the answer. We'd be fighting over mineral rights on Alpha Centauri within a generation. We were not ready. And Kale's people, the ancient gardeners of the cosmos, knew it. So what is the test? I asked, my voice barely audible. How does the proctor grade us? The proctor does not interact, he explained. They do not announce themselves. They simply watch. They observe the final moments of your crisis. They measure the probabilities. Does your species choose unity over division? Does it choose preservation over destruction? Does it choose wisdom over power? The test is not a single event. It is the aggregate of all your choices from this moment forward. I thought about the state of the world. The political tensions, the environmental disasters, the social fragmentation. We were failing. We were failing the test spectacularly, every single day on the global news. And if we fail, I asked, dreading the answer, what happens if the proctor decides we're a lost cause? His response was chillingly simple. Then the Ark Protocol is initiated. My blood ran cold. The Ark Protocol, the same protocol from the time of the flood. You mean you'd cause a cataclysm? You'd de-wipe us out? We would not cause it, Kale corrected me gently. We would simply allow it. Your planet has natural reset mechanisms. The cataclysm that caused the Great Flood was one. There are others, dormant supervolcanoes, asteroid trajectories. The proctor's role is not to pull a trigger. It is simply to decide whether or not to deflect the bullet that is already on its way. If you prove you are a danger to the cosmic neighborhood, the quarantine is enforced. The planet is sterilized of your influence, and the library is preserved so that life can begin anew, unhindered. I was speechless. This was the truth behind the story of Noah. It wasn't an act of salvation from a loving God. It was a failsafe. A planetary hard reset carried out by cold, calculating cosmic conservationists. Noah wasn't saved because he was righteous. He was saved because they needed a janitor for the new world, and we were now standing on the brink of another reset. The proctor was coming to see if we were worth saving, or if it was time to scrub the hard drive and reinstall the operating system. When, I asked, when is the proctor coming? His arrival is imminent, Kale said. That is the signal I am waiting for, the confirmation that he is in position. Once he arrives, my role here is finished. I will be recalled and your final exam will begin. My mind was racing. How long did we have? A year, a decade, a century. It felt like I was the only person on the planet who knew that the final exam was about to be handed out. I looked at Kale, this being who had just delivered the most terrifying news in human history, and I saw him in a new light. He wasn't a judge. He was just the messenger. The guy who came to tell you the inspector was on his way, and he was sad about it. He had spent his long life studying us, recording our art, our music, our stories. He was the librarian who had fallen in love with the books, and now he had to stand by and watch as the library was threatened with demolition. "There has to be something we can do," I said, a desperate plea. "Something I can do. You told me this for a reason. Why? Why tell me if my knowledge changes nothing?" "Because the outcome is not yet decided," he replied, his mental voice growing stronger, more insistent. "The river has not yet reached the sea. A single drop of water can change the current. You asked me why I told you. I told you because your fear was loud, but your curiosity was louder, and your capacity to understand it is significant. You are a storyteller. You reach others. Perhaps your story can be that drop of water." He was giving me a job, a mission. He who could not interfere was telling me, the random guy who broke into his waiting room to interfere. He was passing the baton. It was an insane, impossible burden to place on one person. What could I possibly do? Post a video on my tiny YouTube channel? The title would read, "I met an alien who told me we're about to be graded on a cosmic curve, and if we fail, we get wiped out." People would think I was a lunatic. They'd tear me apart. But what if he was right? What if a story could change things? The story of the Ark had shaped human civilization for thousands of years. It had inspired faith, art, and fear. It had driven people to do great and terrible things. A story was powerful. It could be a seed. "You see only the difficulty," Kale said, sensing my despair. "You do not see the opportunity. Your world is more connected now than it has ever been. An idea, a story, can circle the globe in an instant. You do not need to convince everyone. You only need to plant a seed of doubt in the old ways of thinking, a seed of hope in a new one, a reminder of what you stand to lose and what you could become." I looked around the dusty dome, at the faint stars visible through the grimy slit in the ceiling. He was asking me to be a modern-day Noah, not to build a boat, but to send out a warning, a message in a bottle, thrown into the chaotic ocean of the internet. It was the most ridiculous, grandiose, and terrifying thing I had ever heard. And as I stood there trying to process this impossible task, the humming in the room suddenly changed. It dropped in pitch, becoming a deep, resonant tone that I felt in my bones. The blue lights on the pod began to pulse rapidly, shifting to a brilliant, steady white. Kale straightened to his full height, his entire being focused on the pod. "The signal," his voice came into my head, sharp and clear. "It has arrived." My blood turned to ice. It was happening. Now the proctor was here. Kale turned his head and looked at me one last time. The black, endless eyes seemed to convey a universe of meaning in a single glance, a warning, an encouragement, a farewell. "My time is over," he said. "Remember what I have told you. The story is yours now. Tell it well." And with that, the pod flared with a light so bright I had to shield my eyes. The deep hum intensified into a roar that filled the room, shaking the very foundations of the building. I felt a strange, weightless sensation, as if the air itself was being warped. The roar stopped as suddenly as it began, plunging the room back into silence and darkness. I blinked, my vision swimming with purple spots. When my eyes adjusted, I was alone. The pod and the 9-foot-tall alien librarian were gone. The only thing left in the center of the room was a perfect, clean circle on the dusty floor, and a silence that was heavier and more terrifying than any sound I had ever heard. The test had begun. The silence Cale left behind was a physical presence. It pressed in on me, a heavy blanket of absence. The dome was just a dusty, forgotten room again. The air was cold and still. The only light was the weak beam from my flashlight, which I realized was still clutched in my trembling hand. For a few frantic seconds, my brain tried to reject the entire experience. It was a dream, a hallucination brought on by dust and isolation. I must have fallen, hit my head, and my overactive imagination, fed by years of sci-fi movies, had cooked up the whole insane thing. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting wildly through the dark, searching for any proof that he was real. And then the beam landed on the floor, the circle. It was perfectly clean, a stark contrast to the thick layer of gray dust that covered every other inch of the concrete. It was impossible. No draft, no water leak, no natural phenomenon could create such a precise, immaculate shape. It was the footprint of his ship. It was my proof. He was real. Everything he told me was real. The weight of that reality came crashing down on me. The arc, the quarantine, the proctor, the final exam. It wasn't a story. It was a deadline. I stumbled out of the dome, my legs unsteady, and practically fell down the spiral staircase. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I scrambled through the dusty rooms, my only thought being to get out, to get back to the world that was now unknowingly on trial. I squeezed through the rotten window, scraping my back on the splintered wood, and collapsed onto the damp earth outside. I lay there for I don't know how long, gulping in the cold night air, my face pressed against the dirt. The stars above seemed to mock me. They weren't just pretty lights anymore. They were eyes. They were watching. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember any of it. My mind was a chaotic storm of Cale's words. I kept seeing those vast black eyes, feeling that ancient sadness. When I got back to my small apartment, the first thing I did was go to my computer. I had to do what he said. I had to tell the story. I sat there, staring at the blank screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. But how? How could I possibly explain this in a way that anyone would believe? I started writing. I typed out everything, every detail, every word he spoke in my head. I described the pod, the feeling of the hum, the iridescent skin of the traveler. I wrote for hours, the sun coming up and painting the sky outside my window. But the more I wrote, the more I realized how insane it sounded. It read like a bad sci-fi script. I could already hear the comments, the ridicule, the accusations of a hoax. People would dismiss it, tear it apart, and the message, the crucial, world-saving message, would be lost in a sea of internet cynicism. Cale had called me a storyteller, but I felt like a fool. For days I was paralyzed. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the world burning, sterilized by a silent, cosmic gardener. I watched the news and saw nothing but evidence of our failure. Wars, hatred, division, greed. We were flunking the test with flying colors. The proctor was watching, and we were putting on a horror show. I felt the crushing weight of it all, the responsibility Cale had laid on my shoulders. I was a single drop of water, and I felt like I was supposed to stop a tsunami. One night, sitting in the dark, I remembered the last thing Cale had said. "The story is yours now. Tell it well." He didn't tell me to prove it. He didn't tell me to make people believe. He just told me to tell the story, and I realized my mistake. I was trying to write a factual report, a piece of evidence, but Kale's people didn't deal in evidence. They dealt in stories. The story of Noah wasn't powerful because it was scientifically accurate. It was powerful because it spoke to a deeper truth about fear, hope, and second chances. It was a myth, a legend, and that's what I had to create. I deleted everything I had written. I took my camera, the one I'd taken to the observatory, and I started talking. I didn't present it as an alien told me this. I framed it differently. I told it like a personal experience, a confession. I started from the beginning, the rusty fence, the thrill of exploration. I described the fear, the confusion, the awe. I talked about what I saw and what I thought it meant. I never said the alien's name was Kale. I said I felt like I should call him Kale. I never said he told me Noah's Ark was a spaceship. I said he gave me an impression, a vision of a story I thought I knew, but it was twisted, different. I didn't present his words as quotes, but as the feelings and ideas he left me with. I talked about the overwhelming sense of being watched, of being on a clock. I spoke about the feeling of our world being a beautiful, fragile library, and the terror of realizing we were the ones holding the matches. I didn't ask people to believe in aliens. I asked them to believe in the possibility that we were failing ourselves. I asked them to think about what story we were writing right now for whoever might be watching. I kept it grounded in my own emotional journey, my fear, my doubt, my sliver of hope. I ended the video not with a call to arms, but with a simple, quiet question. If this was our final exam, what is the one thing you would do, starting today, to help us pass? I didn't mention a proctor or a cosmic quarantine. I let the story imply the stakes. I uploaded it to my small channel, titling it, "I broke into an abandoned observatory, and what I found changed how I see the world." I didn't use a sensational title about aliens or Noah's Ark. I made it about my experience. Then I turned off my computer and walked away. I had done what he asked. I had told the story. The rest was out of my hands. For the first week, nothing happened. A few of my regular subscribers watched it. The comments were mostly about the creepy atmosphere of the observatory. Then something strange started to happen. The video was shared, not by huge accounts, but by small ones. It ended up on a forum about philosophy, then another about environmentalism, then a blog about mythology. People weren't arguing about whether it was real or fake. They were discussing the ideas. They were talking about the metaphor of the library, the concept of a cosmic test. They were answering my question. The comments were incredible. People wrote about volunteering in their community, about mending a broken relationship with a family member, about changing their career to something that helped people instead of just making money, about simply trying to be kinder. They weren't doing it because they believed my story literally. They were doing it because the story resonated with a fear they already had and a hope they were desperate to feel. It was a modern myth that gave them a framework for the anxieties of our time. It was working, not as a news report, but as a catalyst, as a seed. I never went back to the observatory. I don't need to. The proof is not in that clean circle on the floor. It's in the actions, however small, that the story inspires. I still don't know if we'll pass the test. The world is still a chaotic, dangerous place. The news is still full of darkness. But now I see something else too. I see the drops of water, the small currents of compassion and unity pushing back against the tide of fear and division. Kale gave me a terrible burden, but he also gave me a gift. He gave me a new way to see the world, not just as a collection of warring tribes and competing interests, but as a single, unfinished story. A story that we are all writing together, every moment of every day. And he taught me that it doesn't matter if the gods are real or if the aliens are watching. What matters is that we live as if they are, that we act as if our every choice is being graded, our every kindness recorded. Because in the end, we are our own judges. We are our own proctors. The power to pass the test has been inside us all along. We just needed a story to remind us how to use it. I continue to make my videos. I don't talk about aliens anymore. I just tell stories. Stories that find the hope in the darkness, the unity in the division. I'm still just a storyteller. A single drop of water in a vast, unknowable ocean. But I know now that an ocean is made of single drops, and a story, told well, can sometimes be enough to change the tide. I hope you'll consider what story you're writing, and if you found this one meaningful, maybe you can share it. Like, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Because our final exam is happening right now, and we're all in it together.